Hello, my name is Travis Woods, and I am a grad student here at Liberty University, and I wanted to share this interpersonal communication project with you for this course, HSCO 508. Please enjoy the journey. To introduce myself, I am 35 years old. I have a lovely wife by the name of Latarsha Woods. We've been married for 11 years, and my daughter's names are Destiny, who is 7, and Trinity, who is 1. And I am the founder and the chairperson of a nonprofit organization that I started a few years ago called Youth Impact. Next slide. My overarching goal, it is to continue to learn human behavior, or my personal human behavior, so I can build positive relationships by utilizing effective listening and communication skills as I interact with others. Next slide. What's the definition of interpersonal communication? Stewart says interpersonal labels the kind of communication that happens when the people involved talk and listen in ways that maximize the presence of the personal. And this really describes how it's important to understand that person as an individual, not just what they say in one conversation or just in a situation, but really get to understand who they are as a person and their intellect and their emotions and just what their history is. And in doing that, you can relate to them so you guys can build a relationship and communicate effectively in the future. Next slide. My background, my father and mother divorced when I was 5 years old. During that time, when my father remarried, I noticed that I was the oldest. When he had children, I was the oldest there, and I was the youngest at my mother's house. And in knowing that I was the only male, so I had to communicate effectively to another gender, which it was all sisters. And when I did that, it was kind of hard at times because I had to really strategically find my place and how to communicate, because we did different things and we reacted in different ways. So that was one of my first challenges or learning curves to communicate effectively. And I like to play basketball, so playing basketball was very helpful because I had to communicate on and off the court so we can be successful as a team. And I regularly attended church since I was born, so I got to interact with a lot of different people. I was able to be a part of different programs and be a part of different organizations within the church, so it helped me to be diverse as well. Next slide. So Carbonell, he talks about the 4 temperament model of human behavior, and within this model, it talks about the 4 areas that describes my personality and my human behavior. And he talks about how these 4 areas are independent, but they relate to one another. So the 4 areas are D, which is active, task-oriented; I, which is active, people-oriented; C, which is passive, task-oriented; and S, which is passive, people-oriented. Next slide. As we dig deeper and really, as I understood my personality and human behavior, which is my overarching goal, I learned that up under D, it described me as this directing, striving, demanding, and dominating. And up under I, it described me as inspiring, influencing, inducing, interactive, and also interested in people, which is so true. Up under S, it described me as steady, stable, shy at times, security-oriented, servant, and submissive. Next slide. My behavior blend, when I looked at D, I'm motivated by a challenge. I like freedom, authority, and also difficult assignments. And also, I respond best to leaders who give me direct answers and also stresses the goals and really help me understand the importance of sticking to business. Next slide. Also up under I need opportunities to influence others. I don't like to be isolated. I like to be around people to encourage them. I like to verbalize my ideas, which can be positive but negative at times because everybody doesn't want to hear my personal ideas. Also, I need to learn how to manage my time, because sometimes I can be so people-oriented and task-driven that I forget about the time management, because if I manage my time correctly, I can actually help more people. Next slide. And also up under S, I'm motivated by security. I need an area of specialization, and I need to identify my role in groups, which is very important to me. Next slide. When I took the Uniquely You profile test, I saw what was expected of me, and it says as an IS or SI type, you think people expect me to be both inspiring and submissive. Next slide. What is actually me is, as a DIS or DSI, I tend to have 3 strong motivations, and they are dominating, inspiring, and submissive, which really describes who I am. Next slide. Quantum profile. And when I took this particular test, it was very cool because I scored 96 out of 100, but it really described me to a T. It described how, this is where I paraphrase it. It described me how I like to get in other people's shoes. I like to see myself experiencing what they experience so I can relate to them. And it also says that when I do this, it likely results in few misunderstandings, which is so true because as a person can see that I'm trying to relate to them and get in our shoes and giving them different solutions to their issues, it really, I feel, helps them out a whole lot. Next slide. Enlarging the conversation. What is the definition of this? Stewart says, the one activity that marks us as human and that occupies a large part of our personal and occupational lives is conversation. Conversation can be verbal, nonverbal, exchanging in real time, either face-to-face or mediated by electronic mediums. So when I saw this particular statement that Stewart made, it really helped me because it taught me how a conversation is very important. A conversation is what we as human beings like to do. We like to talk. We like to go out to lunch and talk about things that we are challenged with and talk about things that we are being successful with. Next slide. How I enlarge my conversation. This is something I worked on in my marriage. Making eye contact with my wife. Listening to her with the intent to understand. Try to relate to her. Wait until she finishes talking before I make a statement. And I looked up an article on patch.com, and it says the number 1 reason for divorce is a lack of communication. Next slide. What are my barriers? Perception, reception, and attention is one of my barriers. And Burley Allen really describes how this is something where you perceive a person a certain way and you don't give that person value. So you don't really receive what they're saying and you don't even really give them enough attention that they deserve. So my remedy for this is to be flexible when listening to others, to find value in everyone and to relate to everyone. Next slide. My next potential barrier, is to being fatigued. Sometimes I'm fatigued and I don't feel like listening. And Burley Allen even talked about how when you're fatigued, you start really thinking about your own personal issues and your personal situations. So my remedy for this is to be honest when I'm fatigued. Take a break. Find something exciting about what the person is talking about. Next slide. Internal noise pollution. Interrupter. Which my remedy for this is, if I feel like I want to interrupt the person, I need to strategize and say, hey, let's utilize the talker-listener card, which Peterson discusses. Also, green flag words, which deal with your emotions. We need to identify the thud, or I need to identify the thud and avoid the flat brain tango by not responding to the talker. And biased listening. First of all, I need to really understand the importance of not judging somebody and just listening to the person so I can learn from the person. And also hearing what I want to hear. I need to use the clarifying technique. Next slide. External noise pollution, clock watching. Sometimes it's something that I do, like you got to hurry up and talk. So I have to listen to the non-verbal communication. That's my solution for that. And interruptions. If the person is being interrupted constantly, maybe I can actually talk to set another date so we can really sit down and talk about what we really need to talk about so we can get some things established. Next slide. My action plan. My step 1 for my action plan would be to continue to learn how my human behavior affects my ability to listen and communicate effectively. Step 2 would be to put forth effort into getting to know the person I am having a conversation with, which is one of my overarching goals. Step 3, avoid all barriers and noise pollution to build positive relationships. And step 4, communicate with my actions and my words. And I have some references that you can look at as well. And thank you so much for your time.